Hi everyone, I'm Stephen Basil.
And I'm Ali Afshar.
And we're here for another Google Drive question time, talk about what's new. And this is actually our first one since a very successful Google I.O.
So whoever came to I.O., thank you very much for coming. If you've checked out our videos online of the presentations, thank you for that. If you haven't, please by all means go and do that.
Yeah, there's a lot of great sessions on everything about what's new to working on Android, lots of great content. Today we're going to go through some of the unanswered questions on Stack Overflow and maybe talk about some of the newer features that we launched about 2 weeks ago. So I want to jump onto the first one here.
Let's start. The first question says, can one add additional metadata to Drive files, excluding the description field?
That's a good question. It's a good feature request. It is unfortunately not something that we have right now, but it is definitely something that we have talked about internally. Something I personally would like to see us add to the API, but right now the only things you could do are the description or indexable text is a way that you could attach some data in a way that's somewhat useful.
So can you just mention, you said using the description. I mean, this question says excluding the description field, but how would someone use that, for example?
Well, description is just arbitrary text. It's not the file name. It doesn't affect how it syncs, but it does show up in our previewer. It is something that a client could read out, so they could put some structured data in there, or at least some meaningful data that they can parse out. It is user visible though, so you can't put in anything that is that would come across as too technical or gibberish, but
or some kind of data format like JSON. That would be a struggle. But indexable text, on the other hand,
yeah, indexable text is an interesting option for that. So you can write text, and if there's information that you think would be useful for search that might not be easily extracted from the actual file itself, you can add that. The problem, though, is that I think in this particular case, it's probably not the right solution because you can't read that information back. You could do some very, very clever hacks around searching and testing for existence, but not something I would actually encourage anyone to actually do.
Okay, so great. So to summarize, unfortunately not right now, something we're looking at very, very strongly. And there are some slight workarounds, but just hold that thought. We'll get on that one.
But I'd be very happy when that's added.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really cool things you can do once you have that feature. Yeah. This looks like a documents list question, and a fairly long one. So commenter roles.
So the documents list API has been pretty much replaced by the Drive API, would you say?
Yeah, that is true. As of Google I.O. and version 2 of the SDK and the API, everything that was possible in the documents list API is now possible, and I think personally a lot easier to do in the Drive API.
So all of our questions about the documents list API, our answer would be, why don't you use the Drive API?
Exactly.
The question is ACL role for commenter. So this user would like to share a document with some users, but only to allow them to comment on a document. Now, if you've used Google Docs, you know there's the commenting system on the right-hand side. You add a comment and they get emailed out and they get observed, and you can resolve these comments. A really powerful collaborative feature. So how would you do that with the Drive API?
It's good. I haven't actually tried it, but in the ACLs and the roles, there is a additional roles. I think it's where commenter is. So you should be able to update the metadata, adding in the commenter role into the additional role set, and in theory, that should enable that for that user.
So that's a fine-grained kind of permission tweak, in that our major permissions are either you're the owner of a file, you can write a file, or you can read a file. But the commenter additional role allows readers to also be able to comment. So it gives just this slight additional role. So the answer to this would be just to add the ACL, well, the permission as we now call it, with the additional commenter role.
What's the next one that we have?
The next question.
Oh, this is a good. That one's already been answered. That was a good one, though.
Well, let's have a look at it. Display images which are stored in Google Drive on a public website. Is it possible to access display files like images which are stored in Google Drive on a public website? So, good question.
Yeah, so there are, I mean, you can certainly make files public. Displaying the actual image, though, is a little bit more complicated if you want to just put it in an image tag, because of the way the images are served. Thumbnails, on the other hand, could be displayed publicly, but they are short-lived URLs, mostly for security reasons. But with a little bit of work, you could make it work.
So how, say if you had an image and it was publicly shared, how would you go about embedding that in your web app?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. The download URL for that, I think, even if it's public, though, still requires authentication.
Yeah.
So, but you could actually do. Actually, the API does now support cores. You could load the image with JavaScript and create the image tags dynamically. Just setting it as a source attribute, I don't think will work there.
Or you could do it on your back end.
That's true. You're right. You could always proxy it through a server, cache those images on your own systems, and so on. Yeah.
So a bit of programming using the API.
Something we could make easier.
Yeah. And something we're looking at making easier. It would be really nice for a public image if, I mean, how do you feel about that feature? If we could just have a URI
I think that would be a very useful feature.
Yeah.
I mean, you could do the same thing for HTML pages, for anything that is just a public resource.
Exactly. Something I think we can definitely do better.
I think that this one was already answered, but there are a couple more
unanswered questions.
Unanswered ones that we probably should take a look at first.
This one. Oh, here's Steve's favorite question. Getting a list of files by folder on Drive SDK. I'm trying to build a web UI for users to navigate the Google Drive and select one or more documents to be referenced later on a website from a database. I'm currently building the web interface in PHP. The problem I'm facing, I can't find a single function to get a list of files by folder ID. So a list of all the files that are children of a folder.
Yeah, and he actually does point out in the question, there is a child collection that does let you get all the items in a folder, but as he points out, it only returns back the ID of the item. So if you actually want to get any information about that, you then have to do a separate request for each file to get the metadata. So I think as of yesterday, there is actually a new search parameter that you can use in the files collection, and you can query for folders within a particular parent. And I think the format is just the expression, the ID of the parent folder, and then in collections, in parents.
That's right.
And that will return back every item in that parent folder with all the metadata included in a single request. So yeah, something I actually ran into in something I was playing with, and very happy that feature got added.
Yeah. And our query format's pretty cool, so you can combine these things. So if you just want folders that are within a certain folder, you can ask for that, or if you just want so it's quite powerful, and this is the latest feature as of yesterday. And we should bring attention to this. We're really keen about telling you about our latest feature and what's changing in the API. So we do have a release notes that we usually publish every week or every other week with the changes, and that's in our documentation. So if you've got any doubts or any interest in what's changed recently or what the recent features have been, please by all means go and check that out.
Yeah, and things are still moving pretty quickly. I mean, none of these are changes that break anything, but as we get more feedback from developers, particularly because the API is so new, we are adding features at a pretty good pace. So definitely something to keep a watch on. What else do we have?
Let's have a look. Documents list API question.
Oh yeah.
How to get the field type from atom feed returned by Google list URL. I guess that means the Google Documents List API. Whatever atom feed returned by Google URL, I'm able to fetch the column name but not its type. Is there any way to get the data type of this column? Do you know what that means? I think it means the type that the chunk of XML would map to. How do you do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. That would probably just be in the schema for that particular API.
It's kind of more interesting with the Drive API, because you would have the same problem if you just pass it. Of course, it's JSON rather than XML by default. But each of these resources has a kind field.
Correct.
It's called...
Yeah, so each of the JSON objects has a kind, which basically is the object type. The nice thing with the JSON is it's loosely typed. I mean, integers are integers. But some of the string types are there's a lot of nuances in. Is it a URL? Is it just arbitrary text? But the Atom stuff is all that information about typing would be in the schema itself for that particular API.
Yeah, let's see. That's as much as we really want to say on that one. Some of the client libraries use this type information. Some of them don't. Let me think of one that does. So that the Objective-C library actually registers a programming type for each of the JSON types, and then it does it like that. But the Python one totally ignores it, for example.
Yeah, so that's true. Actually, I think the Ruby one is a little bit more flexible. It will do either format, strings or integers or whatever type you want to give it. But that's one of the cool things with the new API is the discovery information. So the old Atom one was based on XML schema. The new APIs, the Drive API in particular, does have a schema document, but it's in JSON. And you can actually look at those for the API and get very detailed information about the structure of each item in there, what the types are, and so on. And some of our client libraries will actually use that to give nice, strongly typed representations for all the objects.
We're not just trying to be inconsistent with the client libraries. I think they're built to suit the language specifically.
Correct. Yeah.
So Java would be crazy without this static typing. But
right. Yeah. So Java.NET, Objective-C, those are all a little bit more strongly typed. Go. Yeah.
But to do that in the JavaScript library would be insane.
Right. Right. You're not going to have that in JavaScript or Python or even in Ruby or some of the other dynamic languages.
So you may notice we have client libraries for all these languages.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Please go ahead and use them. Right, a question about resumable upload. While resuming upload, getting the size of data that had been uploaded always fails with a 500 internal server error. I was looking at this today. I think it's a bug, actually, so we should look at that. But the cool thing about resumable upload is that if your upload fails during uploading a file, at any point you can then later query the server and ask, how much have I uploaded? And we will return an answer. And this is a question of how do we perform that query. Right. The client libraries have it built in. He's actually using the Java library, which is doing the right thing, and I tried it today and I can't reproduce this error. So it's either a bug or something we're not doing quite right.
Yeah, and it is a 500 error, which does indicate there was something probably wrong with that particular request or that file, but something we'll look at.
Yeah. So in general, if you get 500 errors doing stuff like this, the recommendation is to retry.
Right, could be just a transient error. Yeah. And usually if it is something wrong with the request itself, you'll get back an error message in the body itself that is actually pretty
useful.
Indicative of what
so it should be a 400.
It should be, yeah.
And we're trying to get better at giving useful error messages. We've just had some changes last week to try and just try and explain what you're doing wrong in the request, and we do appreciate this is something we haven't been entirely great at, so we're trying to improve. One word, if you do get a 400 error with no information on why, please get in touch with us, because that's the kind of error that we want to tag some useful information so you know what you're doing wrong. Of course, 500 should never really happen, should they?
No. But on the resumable uploads, you mentioned if it does fail, retry. But there is a set period of time, though, right? I mean, you can't just keep retrying forever.
Right.
So, I mean, what do you happen to know what the how long those uploads are resumable for?
I don't know exactly. I believe it's in the order of hours where that session will remain, but I certainly wouldn't try the next day.
That most likely will fail.
Yeah. But they stick around for a bit. And that's so that you can upload huge files up to 10 gigabytes.
Yeah, there was another interesting conversation on the resumable stuff that I'm not entirely sure if each of the client libraries does this the way that it's really meant to be used. Is some people tend to use Resumable for chunking their uploads, but it turns out that's actually not the way that we'd recommend. Right? We actually recommend doing trying to upload the entire file in one shot, and then only resuming in the case that it fails. But I do know there's a couple of the libraries that don't actually do that. By default.
That's right. And chunking is really useful in situations where you have a limited amount of time, or you have to defer the upload to a task queue, or this kind of thing. Right. Web server platforms, that kind of thing. So, but actually, we don't recommend it's done.
Right.
I think Python is one library which uses chunking by default.
Yeah, and I know the Ruby one as well does that. Something on my to-do list.
We'll have to. Yeah. So Steve is the maintainer for the Ruby library. So if you have any problems with it,
that's right. You can come and just yell at me. That's fine. Let's see. Can't retrieve
file metadata from Google Drive, 404. I'm having some seriously weird issues with the Google Drive API. We're sorry about that to start with. Bear with me here. There's a lot to explain. Oh, goodness.
All right. So he has an account.
He has an account. He got the API working. He's... right. So
I know what the issue is.
I know what the issue is already as well, actually. And I think I've actually commented on this one. So using the picker... well, go on then, if you know what it is.
Well, I didn't read the whole thing, but I'm guessing he's using the file scoop. I saw a comment in there about changing his app ID.
Yeah. So he was using the file scope, and when he changed it to the full scope, it started to work. But actually, he's using the picker. So before we go into this one, and this might take the full of our time remaining, but can you explain the difference between the file scope and the full scope?
Yeah, sure. It's so the file scope is something that we added when we first launched the Drive API a few months ago, and it's something that we actually encourage people to use if it's their use cases, and actually to try to make it fit their use cases as best they can. But the idea is simple. Rather than have all your applications request access to everything that a user has in their Drive account, which could be a lot of things which aren't relevant to that application. It could be a lot of files that are potentially sensitive, financial records, or so on. The file scope allows the user to give access only to those files that they choose to share with that application, or that application created by itself. So it's much more restrictive. Much more secure for users, because they know that application only has access to a very limited set of information. For that to work, however, there are some things that have to happen. So for us to be able to mark a file as being openable by an app, we need some action to tell us, and that's either when the user clicks on a file in the Drive UI and they say open this file in an app, or if it's something that was created in the API, or in this other what we call the picker, which is an embeddable Drive UI. It's a JavaScript component. Any of those things give us an indication that user decided it's okay for this app to read that file. So that's the scope. The other scope is, of course, the full Drive scope, which gives you access to anything, whether or not the user explicitly made that action or not.
And so in this case, the developer is using the picker, but then once he's used the picker to select a file, he's not actually getting access with the file scope. So that thing that you've just described is not happening. Now, this is usually because of one of two reasons. And the first one is that there's a bug, which I don't think it is in this case. The second reason is that the picker is a JavaScript component that runs inside your browser. So that's really subject to what cookies you've got, if you're multiply logged in with multiple users. And that's what I think has happened here. This file that he's testing with is actually shared between both users. And I think the JavaScript component's being loaded with the wrong user or using the wrong cookie, so he's actually giving access to the wrong user. Now, there is a way around that,
Yeah, there is an option to explicitly show the picker for a user. I think it's just set user. I think
set auth user, maybe?
Yeah, that's correct. Set auth user, which you just give it the, is it the email address?
I think you can give it the email address or the user ID, as we call it, and soon we'll be able to pass in an OAuth token as well.
Oh, that's good feature then. There's a couple other things that could go wrong with the picker. So in addition to multi-logon issues where you're logged in with 2 accounts and you might be showing the wrong one, also you do need to set your app ID in the JavaScript when you build a picker. And so if you're not setting the correct app ID or omitted it, then we don't know which app we should actually set that bit for. So there's a couple things you have to get right. Make sure it's the right user, make sure it's the right app, and I don't think there's any origin issues, but there may be. I know that we actually have a related component to this. We have a sharing dialog, which actually just launched about 2 weeks ago, and I know that one actually is very sensitive to JavaScript origins, making sure that the URL of the page that's showing that dialog matches either the open or the create URLs for the app. Picker may be sensitive to that as well.
Right, I didn't know that. You see, the picker, of course, we can use with other things, not just Drive. You can use with images.
It's a really cool little component. You can do image search, maps, even. There's a whole bunch of things that it supports. That
with a good customizable UI, you can show a list or thumbnails, and you can turn off the menu on the side, and it's a good, well-styled component that I think just it shows that your application is using Google Drive in a good way.
Yep.
So we like it. Please use it. So should we end there?
Yeah, it seems like a good
place to end.
Good stopping point. Of course, we'll go back and actually answer all of these on Stack Overflow.
Unless someone wants lots of points, in which case you would have taken notes and go away and answer them now.
That's right. You can jump in right now before we go in and get yourself some Stack Overflow cred.
So please, if you do have questions, please ask them on Stack Overflow. We do take a lot of time and attention to this, so please do that. That's the best way of getting things solved.
And and we'll be back for another one of these. Is it later this week or next week?
Next week.
Next week, and so we'll hopefully see everyone. Well, we won't see you, but you'll see us, and maybe one of these we'll have an interactive hangout for invite some people in and some other developers and people to talk about what they've been doing with Drive.
Yeah,
so,
that would be great.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Take care.